All right, good morning. So now that we have finished reading chapter 1, or at least I hope everyone has finished reading chapter 1, what I'm going to do today is explain the assignment that you will be completing for the rest of the book. So for chapter 1, I broke it down into questions on those 3 Google forms just so that I could make sure everyone was sort of understanding the beginning of the book. But for the rest of the book, I am not going to give you questions on Google Forms. You are going to be completing a different type of assignment. So I will be explaining that assignment today, showing you an example, and then giving you a little bit of help to get started. All right, so first of all, if you come to my website, again, you should always be checking my website. You'll see that for the assignment for today, Friday, it says that you will be completing 1 dialectical journal entry for chapter 1. And again, that is the assignment you will be completing for the rest of the book, will be dialectical journal entries. Some of you may have done these before, some of you may not. So again, I will be explaining them fully in this video. So again, I say watch the video above because this video will be posted right here. And then I also give you a link to a document with the requirements and an example. Okay, so first I will go over the requirements and then an example, and then I will give you some recommendations for how to get started on chapter 1. So if you click this link right here, the requirements and an example, it'll take you to this page. And I'll just go through this with you rather quickly because again, you can take your time and read this more for yourself whenever you want to. So again, you will be completing dialectical journal entries for each chapter. There are 2 parts of a dialectical journal entry. There is a quote from the text and a response to the quote. I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so I can make sure you can all read this as I'm going over this. Okay, so basically a dialectical journal means you pick a quote from the book that you liked or that was interesting to you or you thought might be important, and you respond to that quote. All right, so again, it's going to be 2 parts per entry. And for each chapter, I'm going to assign you how many entries you should do. So for chapter 1, I'm only going to have you do 1 entry as practice because we already answered a bunch of questions on chapter 1. But for all of the other chapters, I'm going to have you do about 1 entry for every 4 pages in the chapter. So if a chapter was 8 pages, you would do 2 entries. If a chapter is 12 pages, you would do 3 entries, and so on. So again, I will tell you how many entries are required for each chapter. All right, you will get 5 points per entry. So if I ask you to do 2 entries, that would be 10 points. And then again, you will get 1 quote or 1 point for picking the quotes and for including the citation. And then you will get 4 points to respond to the quote. All right, you can complete these dialectical journal entries however you want. You can write them on paper, you can type them. And as you see on my website, I have a link right here for the dialectical journal entry for chapter 1. So if you click that link, it'll take you to this page. So again, on the left, you would write your quote and your citation, and then on the right, you would respond. So if you would like to use this page, what you're going to do is either go to File and then Download, or if you are already logged into Google, what you can do is go to File, Make a Copy, and then it will give you your own copy of this document that is saved to your Google Drive. All right, so again, it'll show up for you. It's just not showing up to me because I'm not logged into Google on this browser right now. Okay, so again, you are not going to type in the one that is linked on my website. You have to either download or make a copy of it if you want to use it. Or again, handwrite it. All right, let's go back to our requirements page just to get a little bit more specific about the requirements. So again, you know that a dialectical journal is a quote and a response, and an entry refers to the pair of those 2 things. All right, so first let's talk about the quotes that you are going to be selecting. All right, so again, as it says on this paper, you can select any quote that stands out to you from the chapter for any reason. What I would recommend doing is as you are reading, maybe like write down the page number and the first few words of a quote you thought was interesting. There are also tools that you can use to annotate the PDF chapters of the book that I am posting. So if you're interested in annotating the book, just let me know and I can recommend some ways to do that for you. Of course, if you have a printer, you could be printing out the book and writing on it, but that's definitely not necessary. Okay. So again, you're going to select any quotes that stand out to you from the reading. I will also recommend important quotes at the end of each chapter. So if you're like, I don't know which quotes are important, nothing seems to stand out to me, then I can recommend some quotes to you, but then you have to figure out what your response is to those quotes. All right. And then when you are selecting the quote, you have to use the exact quote as it is written in the book and include a parenthetical citation. So we have gone over parenthetical citations pretty much every time we read something this year. So hopefully we have those down now, but of course there will be an example in my example dialectical journal. Okay, now let's talk about the response because that is a majority of the dialectical journal. So again, anybody could write down a quote from a book, but it's up to you to kind of explain your thinking about the quote or why you picked it, why you thought it was important. So this is a list of kind of ways you could respond to the quote. But before that, your response should be a minimum of 3 to 4 sentences. So again, you will not get full credit if you are not responding in at least 3 to 4 sentences. And here are a bunch of different ways you could respond. So let's say you read a part of the book that was confusing. You could question it and do research on it, and then cite your source. So again, let's say you were unfamiliar with a word. So in chapter 1, they used the word Gestapo a few times to refer to certain Nazi officers. So if there was a quote that included the word Gestapo and you're like, I wonder what that means, you could Google it, do a little bit of research, and then in your response to that quote, be like, I was confused about what the Gestapo was, so I looked it up, and a Gestapo was a certain type of Nazi officer who was responsible for blah, 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 blah. All right, so again, that would probably get you to 3 sentences, no problem. All right, so again, I really encourage you to do that if there are things you are confused about as you are reading, is use that for your dialectical journal. All right, if a quote just seems important to you, like maybe something Eliezer said like really stood out to you, or it was really like deep and impactful, then you could just comment on why you thought it was important. Like this quote was really important to Eliezer because, etc., etc. If let's say you already know about a historical concept or topic and Eliezer brings it up in the book, then you could say, oh, here's what I already know about this topic that Eliezer just mentioned. Let's say you notice that Eliezer is repeating a certain word or idea a lot. So for example, in chapter 1, we see the word night, the title of the book, repeated many, many times. So Eliezer says like night has fallen, and then that's sort of his transition into explaining like the next part of what happened, maybe while they were in the ghetto or leading up to the ghetto, things like that, right? So maybe you could comment on why you think he's repeating that word so much, the title of the book. All right. Of course, if you notice any figurative language, you could explain what it means. So like, let's say there is a simile or a metaphor or some imagery, you could explain maybe why you think Eliezer used it and what the meaning was. Of course, if there is a symbol used in a quote, you could explain it. And remember, I told you in our pre-reading notes that some common symbols used in the book will be nighttime and fire. So if either of those is brought up, you could explain what they are symbolizing. You could explain foreshadowing that was used. So again, we noticed some foreshadowing on page 5. That was part of your part 2 questions for chapter 1. So you could explain what is being foreshadowed, maybe why Eliezer is foreshadowing it. If a theme is brought up that connects to a quote, you could explain it. So like, for example, one theme that might come up in this book is called the loss of innocence. So Eliezer kind of starts out as like a normal kid, but he slowly starts to realize that the Nazis are doing these very evil things, right? So you could comment on how he is losing his innocence by being exposed to those things. If Eliezer were like asked a question, a rhetorical question, maybe you could kind of explain why you think he's bringing up that question, maybe almost try to answer it. One big thing I want you to focus on in the book is Eliezer's character development. So how he changes through his experiences with the Nazis. So far we have only just barely met Eliezer, so we don't really know what changes he's going through yet. But as the book goes on, how is he changing? So his mental state, his emotional state, physically and spiritually. So again, we know from chapter 1 that Eliezer is very spiritual. He prays a lot. Does that change throughout the book? Last two options, you can make a personal connection to the quote. So maybe like if you relate to something Eliezer mentions or is feeling, you could explain why you relate to it. Or you could make associations between the quote and another text. So for example, a lot of you might have read The Diary of Anne Frank in the 8th grade, and maybe you could comment like, oh, Eliezer has to wear the gold star. I remember that Anne Frank and her family had to before they went into hiding. So again, any of these options work, or really any response that you have to a quote is fine. So it's not so much how you respond, it's how in depth you go. So it doesn't matter if you have kind of the same type of response for all the quotes throughout the book, as long as you're still kind of like applying, I don't know, some deep thought into your responses. Okay, finally, let's go over this example. And for the example, I chose this quote that I had you answer a question on, again, in the part 2 questions. And it was this quote: "It was neither German nor Jew who ruled the ghetto, it was illusion." All right, and then I have my citation here, the author's last name, which is Wiesel, and then the number of the page my quote came from, which is 6. All right, so again, that is in parentheses, and then your period goes after that. So your quote does not have to be long. It can just be one sentence. It can be part of a sentence. It does not matter. But your response, again, has to be very developed. So remember, the concept of illusion and disillusionment is something that was in our pre-reading notes as well. And an illusion is a false belief. So Eliezer is saying that false beliefs ruled the ghetto. So this is my explanation or my response to this quote. So my response is, this quote is personification. An illusion is an abstract concept that cannot rule a place. So again, he is using a literary device here, but now I'm explaining what it means. Eliezer telling us that illusion ruled the ghetto means that the future Eliezer, so again, the future Eliezer, who is writing this book, thinking back on the past, he is reflecting on the past and how the Jews of Sayet wanted to believe that nothing bad would happen to them. So again, they had this illusion because they wanted to believe that everything would be okay. Just before this quote, Eliezer mentioned that people believed or wanted to believe that life would go back to normal after the ghettos. Eliezer thinks that people wanted to convince themselves things would be okay, when deep down they really knew they were in danger. It seems like most of the Jews convinced themselves of this illusion. All right. So again, in my explanation, I'm saying why Eliezer says that illusion ruled the ghetto. So I fully kind of broke down the quote. All right, so again, my response was a little bit longer. It was, let's see, 4 pretty developed sentences. So yours can be a little bit shorter than mine, but you still kind of have to show that you really thought about a quote. Okay, so again, this is my example, and these are the directions and requirements. And then what you're going to do, again, for each time that we have read a part of the book and I assign you a dialectical journal, again, I will link it on my website, so you can either go to this Google Doc and make a copy or download it and type your responses in there and your quotes, or again, you can just write them out on binder paper or however works for you. So the assignment for chapter 1 is 1 dialectical journal entry. So now I will just go through chapter 1 and mention a couple quotes that you might pick for your entry. So some important quotes that stood out to me. All right, so I will go back to the beginning of chapter 1 and just kind of scroll through and point out some quotes that I think you could respond to. All right. So let's see, one quote that stood out to me on page 1 is when Eliezer is first speaking with Moshe the Beadle, and Moshe the Beadle asks Eliezer why he prays. And Eliezer thinks to himself, why did I pray? A strange question. Why did I live? Why did I breathe? So through this quote, you could respond saying like, Eliezer believes that like praying is so important that it's almost as important as living and breathing. And this shows us like how deeply Eliezer believes in his faith. All right, so again, this would be one quote you could pick for chapter 1. Let's see. Another important quote would be when Moshe the Beetle told his story of what happened to him after he had been deported along with the other foreign Jews of Sayet. So again, this part was a little bit disturbing because again, it refers to the murder of all of these foreign Jews for no reason. So this is kind of the beginning of the genocide. So it says, without passion, without haste, they slaughtered their prisoners. Each one had to go up to a hole and present his neck. Babies were thrown into the air and machine gunners used them as targets. So obviously this is really horrible. But maybe while you're reading this, you were thinking, oh my gosh, did this really happen? And you wanted to do a little bit of research. So then in your response to this quote, you'd be, okay, so I researched it and this is what I found about how the Gestapo would murder these people. All right, so again, that's another option. A couple other quotes that were important. So again, we talked about the foreshadowing on page 5, right here in parentheses. So you already kind of wrote about that if you did the part 2 questions, but you can choose it again if you wanted to. Let's see, some other quotes. All right, so now we are on page 9, and page 9 kind of stands out to me because Eliezer is watching all of these people that he knows from his life walk past him as they are being deported. So right here in kind of the middle of page 9, he says, here came the rabbi, his back bent, his face shaved, his pack on his back. His mere presence among the deportees added a touch of unreality to the scene. So Eliezer is kind of commenting on like, it doesn't seem like this is real. How could this be happening, right? So you could explain why maybe he doesn't want to believe it's real. So again, why he almost has that illusion built up. Let's see. And then finally, you could comment on any quote from this last part of the chapter. So again, maybe this last sentence really stood out to you because it's when Eliezer is saying like, wow, we had actually been deported. Like the train is moving. We're on our way. Who knows where? Okay, so if you have any questions on how to do a dialectical journal, please let me know. And then I will talk to you next week about how we are going to start reading chapter 2. All right, I hope you all are doing okay, and I will talk to you soon.